Has there ever been a story premise that just hooked you instantly? Like zero hesitation, making your imagination go wild with just how genuinely cool the possibilities of that premise actually are. For a lot of people, maybe it was the idea of a secret wizarding world just waiting to hand you a letter on your 11th birthday. Or maybe it was holy wars in the desert fought on the backs of giant skyscraper-sized sandworms. Well, how about giant monolithic cities on wheels? Not enough for you? How about giant monolithic cities on wheels that eat other giant monolithic cities? Still not enough for you? Okay, how about we throw in airships, Terminators, and a mountain of dry British humor, and you've got none other than the incredible Mortal Engines series. Probably one of the most deeply imaginative, visually wild, and insanely dark YA series ever written. But chances are, if you've heard of it lately, it probably wasn't for the books, but for one of the most wildly divisive movie adaptations of all time. The one that very loudly became one of the biggest box office flops in recent memory. But here's the thing, Mortal Engines is so much more than that, because the book series is incredible in its own right and spawned sequels, prequels, and spin-offs that never really stop. So in this video, we're digging into all of it. What this series is all about, why did the movie flop so hard, and now that the dust has settled, where everything is at today, to explore whatever happened to Mortal Engines. Hi everyone, my name is Otto and welcome to Exits Examined. In this channel, we will be exploring series, franchises, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below, and I want to give an enormous shout out to my patrons who keep this channel alive. Thank you. Now, quick heads up, there will be mild spoilers throughout the video. I tried to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, but I don't think anything that will majorly ruin anything, but you've been warned. Mortal Engines. Some people sum it up simply as giant cities on wheels eating other cities, usually with the same energy as someone describing a monster truck rally show, which is totally fair. But stopping there does massively undersell what this series actually is, because it is so much more than just its premise. Written by British author Philip Reeve, Mortal Engines kicked off in 2001 and would later grow into a full series of books, a prequel series, short stories, and eventually a very expensive and equally divisive movie. Now, people throw around all sorts of labels for this series: science fiction, post-apocalyptic, steampunk, and technically it's all of the above. This is a world full of absurd tragedy, pitch black humor, and some of the grayest of gray characters you'll find in anything labeled as young adult, all sending you on this roller coaster of emotion, because the writing veers between this hilariously dry and disassociated British humor before veering almost instantly back into devastating. Because this is an awful world filled with awful people. And I mean, in the first book alone, there are graphic scenes of death, with one as an example where a character's pet monkey gets shot before they themselves get shot as they die, slowly sinking into quicksand while passing gas. But that's part of what makes this work. Reeve commits to the bleakness of his world and leans into it, making it an integral part of the story, which is great because anything else would just feel disingenuous. So let's actually zoom out and take a look at what makes this world tick, or rather roll. The world of Mortal Engines is basically what you get if Fallout had a baby with Mad Max, and then if that baby grew up obsessed with municipal infrastructure. It's our world, technically, but post-apocalyptic to the point of absurdity. Now, the whole mess kicks off with the lovely little event called the 60-minute war, because, well, can you guess how long it lasted? But what it lacked in quantity, you can bet it made up for in quality, baby. We're talking nukes, friggin' laser beams, asteroids, earthquakes, supervolcanoes, and as one character charmingly sums it up, quote, 60 minutes was all it took to bring humanity to the very brink of extinction. So yeah, things got bad. And you know the saying, drastic times call for drastic measures, so some mad lads had the idea to make traction cities, which are enormous mobile metropolises mounted on tank treads powered by massive engines rolling across the scarred earth in search of smaller prey. Now the brainiacs among you might think to yourselves, that may not be the most effective strategy to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, which, sure, fine, but you got to admit it's metal as and probably fueled after the boys were on a week-long bender watching BattleBot reruns. Anyway, calming back down. When I say prey, I mean other cities, because in this world, cities are straight up herbivorous. They got giant metal jaws to scoop up smaller towns, which they then strip for parts, in a process the traction cities call municipal Darwinism. As for the people, if you're lucky, you're absorbed into the population, and if you're not, well, let's hope you weren't too attached to freedom or basic human rights. And if that all sounds horrifying, congratulations, you're absolutely catching on. The cities themselves are layered nightmares. The rich live in ivory towers at the top, while the poor suffocate in smoke and steam down by the engines. Picture a mobile steampunk caste system rolling across a wasteland, and you're pretty much halfway there. But it doesn't stop there, because each city is its own twisted little microcosm and has its own brand of terribleness. London is a towering war machine obsessed with conquest. Brighton is more of a pleasure yacht complete with slavers and an idiotic mayor. Anchorage is racked by the plague. They're each their own kind of city-state complete with their own politics, priorities, and specific brands of dysfunction. And it's not just about the big cities. You've got smaller traction towns, mobile settlements, and skyships flying between them all, and you've even got entire airborne cities as well. You've got the Anti-Traction League, made up of static settlements, aka normal towns who hate the traction cities, and that's what I meant earlier when I said that it's not just the premise. Mortal Engine takes the crucial step of taking its bizarre premise and then asking the very important question, okay, so what are the implications of this premise? And by doing this, the entire world feels very fleshed out in this darkly absurd world that mirrors our own in very bizarre ways. Municipal Darwinism is a dogma, and instead of thanking God, people thank Quirk, the founder of modern London. Instead of Christmas, they celebrate Quirkmas. Instead of Europe, there's the great hunting grounds where predator cities hunt one another. And the beauty of this world is that it's close enough to our own that you can easily understand something because it's relatable, but Reeve tilts it just enough to make it strange and unsettling. But crucially, extremely crucially, it's not just the world here. The characters are in many ways more of the focal point for the series, and their humanity and the changes they go through really are at the heart here, and this terrible world is more of a backdrop for this growth or sometimes regression, because you get a sense that the characters really just are kind of at the mercy of this world and only are able to react to it and try to survive the terrible circumstances they're thrown into. And at the center of it all are two characters who are not only foils to each other, but also to the world around them. They're shaped by the same awful system, but respond to it in completely different ways. First up, we got Tom, our bright-eyed apprentice historian from London, and from the very first chapter of the first book, he has major golden retriever energy. Kind of naive, sweet, and wide-eyed. When we first meet him, he wants to impress his hero, go on a big, exciting adventure, and maybe fall in love. Of course, the reality of this terrible, overbearing world immediately smashes all of that to pieces. This world is brutal, and Tom gets absolutely chewed up by it, figuratively and almost literally. But here's what makes him special. Even after everything, he never loses that spark or that basic goodness. He holds on to his optimism, curiosity, and empathy in a way that makes him feel like the last real human being in a world gone full Mad Max. And as an absolute 1000% counterweight and complete and utter inverse to this, we got Hester. Oh, Hester. Where Tom's hopeful, Hester is bitter. Where Tom dreams, Hester fights. And oh my god, I don't think I remember another character giving me such a whirlwind of conflicting emotions from one chapter to the next. Hester is one of the most conflicting characters I've ever read. She's fueled by rage and trauma and completely unwilling to trust anyone. She's scarred emotionally and also literally, with this huge disfiguring scar that has mutilated most of her face. And pretty much everyone around her describes her as hideous. Now, make no mistake, this is not a case of ugly on the outside and beautiful on the inside. Hester can be awful. She lies, kills, betrays, and holds grudges like it's her hobby. And yet, despite all of that, somehow you still care. There's this one really achingly human scene where she's holding on to someone she loves, but really needs to pee and decides she'd rather die of holding it in than leave her person, which is really cute in its own way. Now, mild spoilers here for the next few minutes. Eventually, her and Tom become a couple, even though their relationship is, well, maybe not couple goals, because I'm pretty sure a couples therapist would be looking like Melfi by the end of their sessions. So, for example, when Hester finds out that her boyfriend kisses another girl, instead of, sending him death and knife emojis or constructively talking out their problems, she instead decides to sell out the girl's entire city to a giant evil slaver city. So if you think your relationship is toxic, just know that there is an entire apocalyptic hierarchy and Hester is sitting comfortably near the top. But I think what's super important to mention here is that it's never just one and done. There's always this sense of moral ambiguity. Some moments you hate Hester, some moments you want to hug her and tell her everything is alright, and then the next moment you will be absolutely disgusted in her. And this sense of never really knowing what to make of people carries over to the other characters as well, because it's not just Tom and Hester. We've also got Valentine, who starts off seemingly to be set up as just another villain, but as the book progresses, you see that he is extremely layered, complicated, and even sympathetic in his own way. And then there's Pennyroyal, who seems like a pompous idiot, but despite all of that, still gets little flickers of humanity and redemption. And by the way, he is an extremely entertaining character, with one of my favorite quotes from him, quote, "When the going gets tough, the sensible conceal themselves behind large items of furniture," end quote. Absolute legend. Now, I really hesitate to describe the side characters as side characters because they are just as nuanced, having both heroic or despicable traits, with Anna Fang being incredible, but throughout the series goes through massive changes, and Shrike, or in the US version, Greik, who is a literal undead murder cyborg called a stalker, yet still somehow manages to be one of the most compelling characters in the series and way more emotionally complex than he has any right to be. And honestly, I could go on like this forever. The point is that the series nails character work. Everyone feels distinct, everyone's morally messy, and that constant push and pull, and showing you that in this awful world, people are pushed to their limits. Good people do terrible things, awful people do great things, and it's just incredible to see a YA series stick to its morally gray scruples so hard. Because yes, this is a dark, brutal, messed up world where no one, and I mean no one, is safe. Characters you love will die, and not always in some noble, heroic sacrifice. Sometimes they die for stupid, pointless reasons because this is a stupid, pointless world. And it all kind of loops back around because the entire concept of municipal Darwinism is objectively kind of stupid. But that is kind of the point, and even the very title Mortal Engines references how this isn't sustainable. The people here are stupid, or petty, or completely unhinged, or some deeply chaotic combo of all three. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and probably in the dumbest way possible. You want to hug the main characters and tell them that it's going to be okay and protect them from this disgustingly selfish world, but you can't. And you know in the back of your mind that in every book, at least one terrible, awful thing will happen. And this is all made the more powerful by the sheer absurdity of the series' tone. Yes, it's bleak and violent and dark, but sometimes it's just ridiculous and hilarious in a very dry British way. For example, in the very first book, Tom and Hester get captured, and their captors plan to sell them as slaves, but the captors are not very impressed by Hester's looks. So he's trying to sell them with a good old buy one, get one free deal. Or the moment when Hester kills someone with a typewriter. Quote, "When her gun was empty, she put it down and killed the last man with a typewriter. The carriage return bell jingling cheerfully while she smashed in his skull." End quote. Again, this was marketed as YA, and I love it for it, and this kind of tone permeates the books. And I think overall, the phrase that defines Mortal Engines most accurately would probably be absurd tragedy. And I say that because it's constantly bumping these gut punch emotional moments with just genuinely beautifully well-crafted bits of writing, kind of ducking and weaving between hilarious flippant moments, then swerving into beautifully tragic lines that are just so well phrased. That's not even to mention the extremely tight structure of the books. With an opening scene that doesn't just throw you into the action, it immediately introduces the whole concept of municipal Darwinism in a way that feels organic. And even in the smaller details, the writing shows its quality. Like early on, the head of London is described always as the mayor, this larger-than-life figure that even the illustrious Valentine has to defer to. But later, when things have taken a bit of a turn, he's instead described as, quote, "The old man sobbed," end quote. And these subtle intentional details are littered throughout the books. Even the name of the reoccurring airship, the Jenny Hanover, which I looked up and was really interested to find out that Jenny Hanover actually means the mummified carcass of a skate or ray modified by hand to resemble a demon or dragon. And even the title of the series itself is a Shakespeare reference. Quote, "And oh, you mortal engines whose rude throats the immortal Jove's dread clamors counterfeit," end quote. And speaking of Shakespeare, Reeve was clearly pulling influences from everywhere. Sure, you've got your classic literary nods, but also plenty of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and even weird Victorian sci-fi stuff in there. In fact, one of his biggest influences wasn't a novel at all, it was this weird Victorian book full of detailed engravings of bizarre flying machines that Reeve said first got him thinking about a world powered by these absurd, implausibly large machines. He also drew from architectural drawings, which makes total sense when you realize that Reeve wasn't even originally a writer. He actually had an illustrator background, and you can really tell because the imagery in this series is so visceral and visual. Apparently, the entire idea of traction cities came from Reeve thinking about what urban sprawl would look like to its logical conclusion and imagining cities literally consuming smaller towns. And from there, he wrote a short story called Herbivore, which laid some of the groundwork for what would become Mortal Engines. Originally, the main characters were going to be adults, but when Scholastic got interested in publishing it, they asked Reeve to rework it as a children's book. So yeah, Mortal Engines wasn't born as YA, and that probably explains a lot about why it still feels so dark, so political, and so full of moving parts, both literally and figuratively. But despite those darker moments, or maybe because of them, the series took off, and one weird, brilliant, kind of terrifying book led to more and then more. And it turns out there's been quite a bit of, wait for it, traction with Mortal Engines over the years. Sorry, had to. And Reeve, he never really stopped. The man's been quietly building this world out since the early 2000s. So reading about epic fantasy battles is great, but playing through them is even better. And if you want dice that look as epic as the worlds you play in or read about, let me introduce you to a company that takes dice seriously, like really seriously. Baron of Dice creates some of the most beautiful, high-quality dice out there, perfect for your next gaming session, your favorite wargame, or even just as a gift for that very lucky nerd in your life. Their hand-swirled resin dice are heavy and precision engraved with designs that span from everything from classic fantasy to deep space and grimdark war zones. Trust me, if you're into Dragonlance, Warhammer, or just love a good crit roll, they've got a set that will speak to your soul. Now, I love working with companies that are genuinely passionate about the tabletop community and fandom, and these folks are in it for the love of the game. So check out the link below, use the discount code on screen, and treat yourself to some of the most gorgeous dice that are out there. Okay, back to the video. Now, of course, it all kicked off with Mortal Engines in 2001, but that was just the beginning. The book ended up launching a full series known as the Mortal Engines Quartet, 4 books published between 2001 and 2006. Now, in the US, the series also went by names like Predator Cities or the Hungry City Chronicles, which Reeve apparently wasn't thrilled about. And without giving too much away for spoilers, the scale in these absolutely explodes, bringing in new cities, characters, and aspects to the world, and almost all the characters grow and or regress in many ways, with the last book being a nice circle in many ways, and the ending in particular being simultaneously extremely depressing but also somehow uplifting. Now, this quartet is what the rest of the franchise is built around, because it didn't end there. there wasn't just a prequel book, there was an entire prequel trilogy called the Fever Crumb series between 2009 and 2011. Interestingly, it's kind of a miracle we got these at all. Reeve stated pretty firmly he was tapped out on ideas for the worlds of Mortal Engines, but later realized he could breathe new life into it by going backward, like way backward. The Fever Crumb books took place 1,000 years before the original series at the very dawn of the Traction era. That means yes, fewer Traction cities because they didn't exist yet, and yes, way more post-apocalyptic weirdness. You've got mutants that feel like they wandered in from Fallout, and it's also very different in tone and structure, but it does stand on its own. In fact, you could probably read Fever Crumb without touching the original quartet and still make sense of everything. It tells the story of how the world got from wrecked post-apocalyptic mess to let's put wheels on cities and eat each other, and specifically why London was the first to mobilize. It still has the same weird, absurd humor as the rest of the series, with the titular Fever saying to an unhinged crown trying to kill her, quote, "Your behavior is irrational." Or another great quote, "This isn't genocide, this is rock and roll." Now you might be thinking it's kind of weird that the first series was a quartet and this one isn't, and you, my smart little sausage, are exactly on the money. The Fever Crumb series was originally meant to be 4 books, but it just wasn't. Apparently, with the film and then other projects, Reeve just got caught up, and by the time he wanted to go back into the series, his heart just wasn't in it anymore, which is kind of admirable that he didn't want to force something that he just didn't have the heart for. Regardless, the 3rd book ends in a weird, unsatisfying way, and a lot of the character arcs don't fully close because, duh, there was supposed to be more. Unfortunately, Reeve said he doesn't plan to finish it, and at this point, it's safe to assume that we're not going to get a 4th book, which is kind of a shame, because Fever Crumb is worth reading with some great moments. Just if you do decide to read it, manage your expectations going in since you know it's not actually finished. Now, it wasn't just the mainline books either. Over the years, a handful of short stories have trickled out to fill in the gaps and flesh out the worlds a bit more. 2 of the more well-known ones are Traction City and In the Bleak Midwinter, which was released online, but the real centerpiece here is Night Flights, a short story collection that focuses entirely on the character Anna Feng. Some of these take place before the events of Mortal Engines, and the reason Reeve wrote this was apparently because he was inspired after meeting Ji-hae Kim, who is the actress who played Anna Feng in the movie. He was so taken with her performance that he wrote a whole book around the character and dedicated it to her, which respect. Night Flight shows how Anna built the Jenny Hanover and gives us a peek at Anchorage before it was a ghost town, and it's just a nice little addition to the series. But if you're more of a visual person, in 2018 we also got an illustrated edition of Mortal Engines, and it's gorgeous. The artwork is incredible, dramatic, and it really leans into the scale and weirdness of the world. It was co-written by Jeremy Levette and was released around the same time as the movie, but definitely differs from it aesthetically, and if you're a fan of the world, it's a beautiful thing to flip through. Now, originally this was the Traction Codex, which is basically this series' version of a lore Bible, and originally showed up as part of the digital bundle for the Mortal Engines quartets, but was later released as its own standalone ebook. But Reeve always imagined it as illustrated, and so it just kind of naturally evolved into this. And it really just shows how much thought Reeve put into the setting, because the visual imagination behind the series is absolutely insane in the best way, and this just lets you marinate in it. So that's a surprisingly large amount of books, right? Which may lead you to think, surely there's been an equally massive wave of adaptations over the years. Well, yes, but also maybe it would have been better if there hadn't been. Because now we've got to talk about the giant $1 million elephant in the room, which is the Mortal Engines movie. And oh boy, this gets messy fast. Which is a real shame, because for a lot of people, this was probably their first exposure to the world of Mortal Engines. And more likely than not, it was also probably their last. So let's actually take a look at why this was such a divisive thing that to this day, it pretty much dominates almost every YouTube or Reddit discussion. Okay, so the Mortal Engines film hit theaters in the far, far off, distant, and seemingly strange times of 2018. But the wheels were in motion long before that. Anyway, yeah, Peter Jackson himself actually bought the rights back in 2009. You know, the Lord of the Rings guy, and as such, an enormous budget was on this. as well as expectations, which were sky high. Huge budget, talented team, established book series, there were even whispers about this kicking off a whole new cinematic franchise. So, what could possibly go wrong here? Well, apparently a lot. The movie bombed, like really bombed. We're talking about one of the biggest box office flops of the decade. And it didn't just tank financially. Reviews were rough across the board, and to this day, it has not even managed to pull a cult following from the wreckage. So what's up here? Was it really that bad? Well, I mean, I've seen worse adaptations. Artemis Fowl, I'm looking directly at you. But if you're a fan of the books, yeah, I get it. It can definitely be jarring, and not just because of the usual Hollywood smoothing over, complete with an incredible forced and awkward Minions reference. Now, sure, they aged up the main characters, that's pretty par for the course, but most unforgivably, they removed Dog. And the ending was changed to the point of being completely unrecognizable. Now that's all well and fine to a point. I understand that adaptations, by their very nature, have to be different from the books. But there are changes that feel way more egregious and like they miss the point of the books, and none of which more so than Hester's scar, which boy oh boy people were mad about this, and honestly fair enough. In the books, her scar isn't just like a one-off thing mentioned, it's central to her character. It's a constant presence physically and emotionally, and she is completely disfigured by it. And every single person in the series, even Golden Boy Tom, describes her as hideous. And I don't know about you, but this ain't hideous. And it would be one thing if it was just the scar. I mean, I get it. It would be a bold move to have a noseless Hester on your movie poster. But movie Hess is softened in all the ways. And I think the scar is of a larger issue of kind of fundamentally misunderstanding or changing the characters so that they are no longer the characters. Anna Fang loses a lot of her kindness and her mystique and her kind of signature coy smile vibe and becomes more simplified into just a mercenary type. And then Valentine loses almost all of his morality nuanced and is just flatlined into a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Now, to be fair, it's not like it's all bad. The cities and the art direction are genuinely stunning, and the first 20 minutes or so are actually pretty promising, but then it does start to meander and bloat. And I think the real issue, at least in my opinion, so take this with a grain of salt, isn't necessarily that the movie is different from the books, but rather that the movie strips Mortal Engines of two aspects that, well, made it Mortal Engines. First is the absurdism and the dry humor, that cheeky kind of deadpan banter. The weird little jokes and the tonal swerves that made the world feel so distinct are completely gone. The film tries to play everything so straight. Everyone's grim and cool and just simple in a way that feels like every other action movie. Second is the moral ambiguity. There's none of the beautiful nuances of the characters from the books. Thinking that you know that someone is truly vile only to see that there is humanity there, and the film doesn't capture any of that emotional layer with the one possible exception of Shrike. People are either good or bad, and what's left is that everyone feels very Hollywood generic, and like there's nothing that makes the film stand out, which is wild considering I'm talking about a movie with giant moving cities. Still, it's not the worst thing ever. If you go in expecting a pretty fast-moving sci-fi adventure with cool visuals and don't worry too much about what it could have been, it's really not the worst thing ever. And for what it's worth, Reeve was publicly supportive of the movie, but I guess it must have hurt him to watch the film bomb as much as it did, because it flopped hard, and it's been confirmed that there won't be any type of sequel, which may be for the better. Now, if you want an in-depth breakdown of this and why it failed, I highly suggest Eisenhardt's video on it, which I'll link below, who has some great insights into this. Now, this is where things get very tragic, because the movie bombing didn't just kill any hopes for sequels, it also pretty much nuked any chance of a video game. In an interview with Polygon back in 2018, Jackson actually talked about this. He said that if Mortal Engines performed well enough to warrant a sequel, they would definitely make a video game to go along with it. Welp. Spoiler, it did not perform well enough, and since then it's been radio silence, not even a whisper of a game. Which is honestly a massive shame, because if there's one thing the movie nailed, it was the visuals. The massive crawling cities, the airship chases, the bizarre tech, all of it just screams video game potential. I've seen fans throw out some really creative ideas too, and I saw someone on Reddit suggest a Civilization-style strategy game where you manage mobile cities and hunt down small settlements for resources, which would be awesome. And in my opinion, truck simulator, I want a traction city simulator. Now, unfortunately, the adaptation woes didn't stop there, and at this point, I'm seriously starting to think that Mortal Engines may just be cursed when it comes to being adapted into anything. Now, there was supposed to be a graphic novel set in the world called The Haunted Sky, but sadly it never made it to print, and the whole thing was canceled. Now, we did get a few sample pages, and while it doesn't look like it was going to totally reinvent the wheel or anything, it's still a tantalizing little glimpse into what could have been. So yeah, that's kind of it, and it's wild to think that Mortal Engines hasn't had any major adaptation since the movie. Now, say what you will about the film, but it is a bit of a shame that it flopped as hard as it did. If it even had moderate success, we might have seen some type of tie-in content, or more books, games, graphic novels, or even another attempt with a TV series. But hey, I'm not going to complain too much. The books themselves are phenomenal and they hold up on their own, and credit where credit's due, the audiobooks are actually fantastic, so at least we got one adaptation that didn't crash and burn. Now, you might assume after the whole Mortal Engines movie debacle that was the end of the road for the series, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you. But I'm happy to report that there has been, wait for it, traction in the series recently. Sorry, I gotta milk it. In late 2024, Reeve released a brand new book called Thunder City, set in between the mainline series and the prequel series during the so-called golden age of traction cities, and it's good, but a bit of a slow burn. But once you get into it, the characters really start to click. It even has that same slightly abstract, dry, absurd humor Reeve is so good at, complete with Airbnb puns. Now, as far as whether there'll be more books, well, it looks like this might just be the beginning of a new series. In a blurb on his website as recently as January of this year, he's confirmed that he's working on another Mortal Engines book, and in 2024 on Discord of all places, he mentioned he doesn't really enjoy writing short stories and would rather continue Thunder City if it sells well. Either way, he said he would release more info on the new books soon though, so it's just great that we live in a time where there are more Mortal Engine books being made, especially because they don't look like they're dropping in quality. But even if it does end up taking forever for a new book, and if there's no comics, games, or another movie or TV show never materializes, the fandom has never left. It's still going strong and seemingly getting love from all over the world, which, side note, the Japanese cover art is really beautiful in its own way. There's fanfiction, sure, but also some jaw-droppingly gorgeous fan art out there. Stuff that just perfectly captures the tone and the feel of the world. Seriously, if you scroll through the Mortal Engine subreddit, you'll see artwork that looks like it belongs on official covers, and it's not just art. There are fan-made board games, custom D&D encounters, Lego models, and you get a sense that people are still discovering this series and that it's just still growing. I also want to give an enormous shout out to the Mortal Engines wiki as well as the Discord, which is an amazing resource while doing this video, which, by the way, Reeve himself is on and posting periodically. And it's just kind of cool because it's the first time I've ever seen an author use their Discord, which is awesome. And all this love is not that surprising because Mortal Engines is a special series. It's rare, especially in YA, to find something that combines so many weird and wonderful elements in such a unique blend. I think a big reason it stuck with people for so long, even after the movie didn't exactly set the world on fire, because at its heart, it's got these genuinely complex human characters. Ones who grow, break, learn, and come into themselves in ways that feel real, sometimes tragically so. And all of that is matched pace by pace with writing that's sharp, dry, absurd, brutal, and somehow still full of warmth. And on top of all of that, let's not forget giant moving steampunk cities that eat other cities, which I don't care how old you are, that is an amazing, cool premise. It's the kind of world that just begs to be explored, and the kind of thing that makes your imagination explode. And it's no surprise that it's still inspiring people. So in conclusion, wherever you are, on a static settlement, in an airship, or aboard a gigantic traction city, make sure to give your thanks to the almighty Quirk and stay wary out there for predator cities, especially if you're on the great hunting grounds. And above all else, remember, as much as we like to, no one can come back from the Sunless Country. I want to give an enormous shout out to Elliot Summerfield, who helped me tremendously with fact checking and bouncing ideas off of. You can check out more of their stuff in the link below. Another shout out to also Darga, who also helped me with fact checking and bouncing ideas off. And as always, no shout out is ever complete without mentioning my patrons who keep this channel alive and possible, and it's just a great community. You can find out more ways to support me and check out my Patreon in the link below. If you join, you get access to my Discord where you can yell at me or just hang out with the rest of us. And in the future, I think I'll be releasing some Patreon exclusive videos on there. If you ever have any suggestions about what you would like to see on this channel or what you want me to cover next, please drop a comment below. It's been fascinating to hear what you guys are thinking of, and I've been introduced to some great series, including this one. I think I covered it because so many people asked me to. Anyway, that's all. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye.